Hi, welcome to After Hours. My name is Don Walchuk. With me today is Sid Chow Tan. Sid is a community activist. He is best known for his work on the redress for the Chinese head tax and Exclusion Act. And he is also a well-known community producer and activist. Welcome to the show today, Sid.
Hey, thanks for having me, Don. It's so nice to be back here with ICTV. You know, it's so instrumental in keeping the spirit of community television alive.
Well, that's why I had you here today, because we've been doing community television for quite a few years now, and I thought it would be good to talk about what it is that we actually do. How did you get involved in community activism?
I got involved in activism, I guess, as a natural part of growing up, it seemed. When I was growing up in Saskatchewan, we were the only Chinese family, fully Chinese family in town. Experienced a lot of discrimination and got to learn what justice and equality and all these things, and particularly the Medicare battle. I was there, and I remember, I think I was in the 6th or 7th grade when they were talking about Medicare, and I was in a debate and couldn't figure out what the arguments against Medicare would be, and it's just been a part of what I've done. And as I got older and managed to go to university and raise a family and do all these things, they've just become a normal part of my life. I changed my life to accommodate some of the things I feel strongly about.
Well, how did the head tax issue come up?
Well, it came up in 1983. A Chinese senior asked his member of parliament, Margaret Mitchell, if he could symbolically get a refund of this tax, which was an unjust, racist tax. And that begat the redress movement for the Chinese head tax and exclusion here in Vancouver East, very close to the old ICTV office, I might add. And when that happened...
Maybe we should explain a little bit about what the Chinese head tax was. It started in 1885, is that correct?
That is correct.
Yeah.
Right after thousands of Chinese laborers were brought here to finish the most difficult and dangerous part of building the Trans-Canada Railway, the government of Canada wanted to restrict immigration, so they wanted to restrict the immigration of Chinese workers, and they levied a $50 immigration tax. That went up to $100 in 1903, I believe, and then in 1904 it was $500. And that didn't really quell the immigration that much. It was not meant to stop immigration, it was meant to restrict so that the workforce wouldn't overwhelm what would be called all-white workforces or labor unions.
And so this is when they brought about the Chinese Exclusion Act.
The Exclusion Act was brought about in 1923,
right,
when after all this, there were a groundswell to realize that, you know, Canada is an all-white Canada and Chinese were excluded. And in fact, my understanding is from 1923 to 1947, when the Exclusion Act was repealed, less than 50 Chinese immigrants came to Canada, and they were usually of the dignitaries or diplomats or academics or ministers. So that what we have is 62 years of racist legislation, and that was part of, my grandfather paid the head tax.
That's what
he was separated from his wife for 25 years, and my entry into Canada is a result of the end of exclusion and my grandfather being allowed to unite his family after 25 years of exclusion laws.
Well, when I talk to friends at work and stuff like that, I say, my friend does the head tax redress, and they say, oh, that happened 500 years ago. Why don't we just forgive and forget? what do you say to people like that?
Well, I said it didn't happen 5 years ago, and victims,
Yeah.
victims, and I use victims or survivors of that are still alive. There are thousands of Chinese seniors who were separated from their fathers and their families because of a racist law from 1923 to 1947. They have received apologies now from the federal government and from the provincial government. Provincial government just recently. But the fact is, the government discounted them. They didn't take into account it was individuals that suffered. It was families that suffered. And the apology is, for me, an apology should actually acknowledge the wrong. The government has done that. An apology should also have some kind of restorative justice to the people that suffered under that. It should be healing for them, and there should be some kind of reconciliation. And the government has taken what I call the photo ops and the vote pandering part of the apology, and they haven't done the hard work of dealing with restorative justice, of dealing with reconciliation and healing for those. And I'm just so pleased to work with Chinese seniors. I've learned so much from them, and this was a growth thing. I've been doing it for almost 3 decades now, and I got.
How did that come about? Now you're a community television producer, so how did that all come together?
It came together when I realized I asked, when this came up, my grandfather had passed away by then, but I asked my grandmother what I should do, and she said, whoa, Fui, my Chinese name is Ming Fui, and he said, Fui, don't get involved. What if the government comes here in the middle of the night, knocks on our door, take you away, tie you up and throw you in the river? Then where would the family be? And I thought, holy cow, what? I didn't expect that. That came out of nowhere, because I've always grown up with rights and that. And when I heard my grandmother have this fear, I said, I got to get involved. That was, I never let her know I got involved.
Yeah. And that's a real fear she had about government agencies, is that...
Well, our family was colonized on 2 continents. On the one hand. On the other hand, the communist government in 1949 confiscated my grandfather's farm in China when the revolution took place. So this was his reason why he decided. My grandfather had always planned on going back to China and retiring on that farm, since he only understood in all his life there was this exclusion law and tremendous racism. And he wanted to go back. But once they lost the farm, the future was here in Canada. And here in Canada, our family had only been persecuted by the racism. And so governments really have not done our family a lot of good up to that point. And this is what makes me hopeful, because I know that in the last, since I've been around, I've seen the advent of Medicare. I've seen the advent of family reunification for Chinese families. I've actually seen the government acknowledge and apologize for this, although they haven't provided adequate redress to those that were directly affected by these laws. And that's why I still work on it. And I just realized that I can't think of anything better to do with my life than to support my community, than to support the Lo Walchuk, the old overseas Chinese who laid the foundation for all, Chinese immigrants in Canada. Without them, we'd still be talking about whether the Chinese can vote in Canada.
What is happening now with the head tax redress?
The movement is there. It's still looking. Our seniors are dying, and of course, this is the hope of the government to not provide direct redress to those that were affected, in the hope they will all die. So that, as you brought up, your friends say, well, this happened a long time ago. It did not happen a long time ago. There are still people alive. This is not history. Mm-hmm. People that suffered these injustices are still alive. Mm-hmm. They should be recognized.
Now, there's something coming up pretty soon the Legacy Project. Can you talk a little bit about that?
When the BC government instituted what it called a program to deal with historic wrongs against Chinese British Columbians, and out of that has come a legacy project or legacy projects, and part of these projects are to create a book, tell the story of what I call the Gold Mountain adventurers and pioneers who built the railway and who fought for their rights. And many of these people actually gave their lives. They fought in the Second World War for Canada and died without having the vote. Mm-hmm. This is the way Canada was, and part of this is the education part, because I want my grandchildren and I want future generations that are of the early Lo Wak-Kill, the old pioneer families, to actually be proud of that. You know, generations from now, I hope that people will identify themselves as, we're Canadians, we're a head tax exclusion family, just like Europeans do the United Empire Loyalist, or Americans do the Mayflower. Chinese immigration is a big story. It could be one of the most epic and heroic stories, actually, on this continent. And I want to really make clear, the Chinese that came, the immigrants, they are settlers. In some ways, they are even colonizers. And what racism we have had to suffer pales in comparison to the 500 years that our Indigenous brothers and sisters have had to face with colonization and with I guess, the growth of capitalism, with the exploitation of natural resources. And you have to put this all together, and that's the way that I put, by working on racism. Anytime you out an ism, you help all the others. And so this is just one small little part I can do. And I've done it, and thanks to actually community television and working in media, I've been able to make this issue, along with literally thousands of people across Canada.
Now, community television is something I want to talk about. Now, what exactly, when we talk about community television, what are we talking about?
We're talking about one of the legislated systems that's available for Canadians so that they have access to the airwaves. There are three parts to the Canadian broadcasting system. There's public, which is CBC, Radio Canada, and in some ways Public Knowledge Network, CPAC. There's private, which is pretty much everything else except for community television. Community television is a CRTC, Canadian Radio Television Communications Commission, legislated part of the Canadian broadcasting system. It receives over $100 million a year to do community television. That $100 million a year goes to cable companies, but it's public money. I want to make clear, it's public money. The cable companies pay it to the government gives it back to them to run community television. And recently, some of the travails that we've had, and where I got to meet you in the mid-90s, was when the CRTC gave cable companies complete control over community television, as if it were an adjunct.
Now, let's just back up a bit. So when you got into community television, like, what was your experience?
I got into community television I got in because I used to...
this was during Expo, around 1986?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I got in because I used to co-publish a Chinese-Canadian community newspaper, in real paper, where we printed.
Oh, okay.
And somebody that was doing community television...
What was the name of the paper?
Chinese-Canadian Press.
Oh, okay.
And someone who was doing community television, Hotman Cito, asked if I would want to host some community television shows or come in and talk about the community, and I said yes. And when I got there and I realized what was there, this started at the Central Studio. I don't know if any of you remember the Central Studio on Cornwall. Do you know, Don, at one time there were 4 community neighborhood television offices in Vancouver.
Oh, I thought there was actually more.
No, Metro Vancouver, there were over a dozen.
Okay.
There were 4 studios.
Okay.
And now the only facility that we have is the studio that we're talking in. This is for Shaw.
Right.
There are other cable companies too in town. And as much as this will tell you how bad things are, is that Shaw is actually the better producer, in my opinion, of community television. They actually allow us to come into the studio and produce shows. None of the other cable stations do that.
That's true. That's very true.
Novus doesn't do that, and TELUS doesn't do that. Yeah. And I think they're failing, because part of community television is to give the community access to broadcasting, yes. But the most important thing is training to build networks of media producers. We can all be media producers.
Mm-hmm. So what happened in 1996 when they started closing the offices?
Basically, a bulletin came out, or regulations came out, that gave community television to the cable companies to position to grow their business.
Well,
in other words, it became part of a corporate plan.
There seemed to be an expectation to take it to a whole different level. They wanted to do more professional programming as opposed to, volunteers. And at one point, they actually got rid of all the volunteers. Is that correct?
It's absolutely correct. At one time, I was offered 5 minutes once a week.
Which isn't very much.
Which was, and Shaw wanted to package it into their programs. I said no. A bunch of people said no. ICTV, and this is why I'm so proud to be part of ICTV, because ICTV actually started as a result of all the community access programming being booted off the air, first by Rogers and then by Shaw.
Now, ICTV came out of the Rogers Van East office, is that correct?
That is correct, absolutely. But that was where a lot of the organizers were, but there were organizers from all over the Lower Mainland, and they got on and they wanted to get the airtime back. We had petitions, we lobbied the CRTC, we lobbied our MPs, and this is what gives me hope. Within 2 years, the CRTC kind of realized that I don't think we can trust cable companies with community television. We got to get the community groups back in. And that's exactly what happens. And now you're looking at a Shaw community television channel, which has pretty much 50% of community-based groups. And they should be lauded for that. They've done really good work in that area. And there's much more they could be doing, I believe, but I understand that they have the corporate constraints of still using community television to promote their other media and business interests.
Now, when we're talking about community television, it's produced by volunteers or it's produced by the cable companies. How does that work?
The cable companies here in Vancouver, or Metro Vancouver, Shaw gets over $6 million a year of public money,
right,
so that you and I can talk here, representing community groups and community issues. The community channel is to be complementary to the public and the private broadcast systems. It is not meant to compete with them. It is meant to complement them. And when they say complement, that means they should do the things that private and public broadcasting systems don't do, which is provide training, provide access, direct access to community groups and members. And to me, that is the most important part. But even more important, and this is what cable companies have done over the last 15 years, is they've shut down. There used to be thousands of community television volunteers. They used to break down doors trying to get in to volunteer at the 15 or 16 neighborhood offices all over Metro Vancouver. There were 4 studios, and they used to produce almost 100% community access programming. That doesn't happen now. everything has been downloaded to the community groups now. Shaw gives us the studio so we can produce it, but we pay for our own meals, we pay for our parking, we volunteer our time for all this, and we actually even pay our own expenses to volunteer. And I think that's wrong, and something that I think Shaw should understand. But they are entitled to do what they do, because they are actually now the operators and managers of the network. And I think what Shaw strategists don't understand is how this, if they actually produced real community television from the community, they would probably get bigger and better market shares. The community television can be a big plus, but it can be a big plus when people turn on the TV and they see their friends and neighbors on television talking about what's going on in their school, talking about what's going on in their neighborhoods, talking about issues that are important, instead of all this entertainment news and all this lifestyles and all that. Issues that are important, like the price of bread, like homelessness, all these things. And that's what community television can help build communities. It can bring communities together. That's what all those neighborhood offices did. They brought a diverse group of people together to tackle problems, like a lot of outside the box thinking.
Let's talk about community television policy now. If I have a complaint to the CRTC, what would I do about community television? What would I do to be heard by the CRTC?
Well, to write a complaint, there's a very well-known complaint process to get a hold of the CRTC.
What are some of the things that people complain about?
Well, my biggest complaint is I don't think, at least here at Shaw, which is what I'm familiar with, my biggest complaint would be, and I haven't gotten into this, is what the heck is Novus and TELUS doing with their community channel? How many volunteers do they have? My biggest complaint is, where does this $6 million go?
Yeah.
Where does this $100 and some odd million go? Of public money. I'm talking public money that Shaw gets, and Cogeco and Rogers and all these cable companies. Where does that money go? It doesn't see itself in the community, that's for damn sure. I mean, I have to pay for my crew lunches. I have to pay for parking. Jeff Scott, who's gotten a bunch of stuff going out in Tri-Cities. At one time, he had to drive in town, pick up a camera, drive back to his town, do a shoot, and bring the camera back all in one day. And he paid all those expenses. It's just the...
So is there not a process where he can get some of those funds reimbursed, or is that just the way it is?
Evidently not.
Oh, okay.
Evidently not. One good thing that's come up recently, and people should take a look at it, and if you do a Google, it's called the Broadcasting Participation Fund. Finally, the CRTC has recognized that input from people like you and I and other people that care about community television and that care about our broadcast system and about our media can actually be recompensed for their expenses.
Right.
And so I'm just looking into that. I haven't received a penny from it, but I know that Kathy Edwards at Cactus, and Cactus is something you promote.
Well, what is Cactus? Maybe we should talk about
Cactus. Cactus is a nationwide cross-Canada grouping. Cactus stands for Canadian Association of Community Television Users and Stations.
Is there a website that you know of?
Yes, they are. Just Google Cactus.
Okay.
I believe it's Cactus. You're going to get the flower, but put in community television or something.
Right.
You can put it in.
Okay, I will put it in. Now, you're the executive producer of Access Community Television?
That's correct.
Okay. What's Access Community Television all about?
Access Community Television is a show we bring into the studio, just like After Hours, and we talk about downtown East Side issues, and we talk about issues that emanate out of the downtown East Side that affect the whole city. And we've just had a great group of people, community activists and radio host Gennady O'Sullivan, comes on regularly. Molly Karan, who also works on Co-op Radio. Wendy Peterson. We just bring a bunch of community activists and community media people into the studio, and we just, what would we call? We just sort of yell and gel a show out of it.
What is your role, your main role? You're executive producer, but you also do interviews and...
My main role, it seems up to this point, is pay for the meals and whatever expenses it occurs, which thankfully, because we're an all-volunteer group, is very minimal. And that's about it. Get producers, get crew in, help line producers. I'm more or less retired now, so I have the time to put into this kind of stuff, but I was doing it before. I had the time to do all this, and I would get a lot of help. And just want to thank Deborah Angraves for coming on, who used to be one of the coordinators, one of the staff people at the Cornwall office when we had 4 community television neighborhood offices. We can't forget that, because that's what's wrong with community television. There is no presence in the community, no physical presence in the community.
What would you like to see change?
I'd like to see TELUS. I'd like to see Novus, and I'd like to see Shaw forget this idea about using community television to promote their businesses, and get on the priority of what community television was supposed to do. Help communities, build communities, do community organizing so that we can give voice to the people. That's what it was supposed to do. Give training to the people. That's what they're supposed to do.
Now, you're involved in the downtown east side quite a bit. What are some of the projects you're currently working on?
Oh, there's a lot of them. One of them I'm on the board of, one of the founding board members of, is what's called the Downtown East Side Sacred Circle Society.
Okay, can you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, the Sacred Circle Society was formed to raise a totem pole, what we call a survivor's totem pole. This survivor's totem pole is meant to represent the struggles that have happened in the downtown east side, starting from the beginning. There are representatives from the 3 founding communities of the downtown east side, obviously the Aboriginal community, the European community, the Chinese community. There are people from the Japanese Canadian community. There are just all kinds of communities down there, recognizing that the struggle with poverty, the struggle with racism, the struggle with oppression, we have survived.
Yes.
The Chinese have survived the head tax and exclusion. First Nations are still fighting the colonization that began 500 years ago. Japanese Canadians have survived the internment during the Second World War. Southeast Asians have survived the Kamagata Maru. All survivors, and not just people of color, all survivors, transgendered, lesbian, gay, those that were discriminated because of sexual orientation. It's a tremendous project, and we want to raise a totem pole to the spirit of the human species, that we are survivors. We can adapt and we can survive.
Well, it's been a pleasure interviewing you today, Sid, and thank you very much for coming out.
Oh, thanks for having us here.
Yeah. And thank you very much for watching.